Thank you for joining me for another episode of Trip Report. On today's solo episode, I'm going to talk about my third weekend going up to do ayahuasca. I was initially just going to skip over this one since when I had Mark on talking about his first ayahuasca experience, it was this same weekend, and I was worried that it would just be too repetitive. But after going over my notes, I actually did come across a lot more than I thought that I had on this experience, so I figured may as well just record an episode about it. So this was on 10/23 of 2020. So it was a little over 3 months since my previous weekend doing ayahuasca. The first 2 weekends were solo, but I had had a handful of people over the past few months say that they had interest in going, so I threw the invite out to a few people. And as we talked about in Mark's episode, he was having some rough time with some depression with the relationship that he was in and the job that he was in, and just seemed to be in a stuck place in life. So I had thrown the invite to him as well, and he jumped on board and he came out to join us. Anthony, who was also here in a previous episode when we talked about a psilocybin experience, he was ready to step up from psilocybin, so he ended up joining me as well. And then another friend, Tyler, tagged along for the adventure. My first two experiences were in Idlewild, and this time it was in Joshua Tree. So we all hopped in our vehicles, headed up to Joshua Tree, and it was on the outskirts of where the national park was. We pulled up, and the venue was just amazing. I mean, although it was just barely off the road, it had a very long, steep driveway up to a house that was there just by itself on this little plateau with 360-degree view of the surroundings and the town that was below. So we all set up our tents in the backyard next to this, beautiful infinity edge pool, and it was just the perfect setup for this ceremony. So as I read through the journal, I had put down that in previous ceremonies, it became clear to me that sometimes there are people there that are just to hold space for others and that they don't necessarily get the life-changing experience themselves. And I journaled that before things started, that I was okay if I was just one of the people that were there to hold space for the other guys, and that I was just hopeful that they got what they needed on this journey. And that was really my intention for the evening. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just allowing whatever information I needed to learn to flow my way. We kicked things off at sunset, and this was the first time the facilitator offered the pure ayahuasca vine, so just the MAOI, about 45 minutes before the ceremony started. So we all consumed our dose of that, and then she went over the rules of the ceremony for the newcomers. We then took the first cup, and having that MAOI prior to the ayahuasca brew made a huge difference. I talked about in previous podcasts how it was not uncommon that I had nothing come on from the first cup, and it was only at the second cup that I started to see visual changes. Yet with the MAOI beforehand, I was noticing effects almost immediately after the 30-minute silent meditation that we start with. So when we went around before the ceremony and were setting intentions, Anthony apologized to everyone in advance for being a very audible puker. And that was a quality that I had discovered about him in our combo journey. But I had to laugh because the first guy to hit the bucket in this ceremony was the loudest puker I've heard in my entire life. It was so loud that it was almost comical, but it was somewhat annoying at the same time because the facilitator always suggests at the beginning of the ceremony to be respectful of others and to try to keep the decibels of your purging to a minimum, but this guy was just letting her rip. Regardless, I'm sure that guy helped to put Anthony at ease about purging when his time came. Reflecting back on my journal entry now, I wrote that I almost didn't take the second cup, and honestly, I don't remember why. Nothing really came through all that crazy from the first cup, at least nothing that I wrote down, so I don't know why I wouldn't have gone back up for the second one, but I ended up going up for it regardless. So after that second cup, the vision started to become a lot more vivid. And I got the reminder, it was similar to that Mesmerica podcast I'd done previously, talking about the combination of psilocybin and a cannabis edible. And it was a reminder to me again that these DMT visuals, this other side, that these were the dreams and nightmares that I had as a very young child before I was able to program this current world, this existence into my brain to be able to dream about things that are earthly. So that was kind of a weird thing to come up. And then that was like the beginning of it. And then my mind just started to wander from there. And one of the first things that it wandered to was me spending time in the gym. Now, when I was in high school, I rode BMX. So I wasn't into sports or anything. And I didn't really spend any time in the weight room. if we were ever in the weight room, we were just doing homework in there. So I never had any real experience with lifting weights, working out, or anything along those lines. But when I was in Iraq, I met a few people that were into bodybuilding, and I just decided there's nothing better to do over here, so I may as well start going. So I had actually, when I arrived in Iraq, I weighed probably 185 pounds. And when we came back to the States, I was up to 220. And when I got back, people were asking like, well, were you taking steroids? What are you on? Whatever. And I was just, I guess, lucky that I have a frame that builds muscle pretty easily, because I didn't take anything other than like a pre-workout or protein powder over there, but still put on a lot of muscle pretty quickly. And I quickly became fascinated by working out, because it was interesting to be able to understand that you can shape this body to whatever you want it to be, as long as you understand the right way to work out muscles and to figure out how to break them down and rebuild them. I know that there's plenty of published research out there that shows that those with higher muscle mass toward the end of life live a better quality of life and live a longer life. And, it's often said that lifting weights is the fountain of youth. So I know the benefits that are associated with working out and longevity. But then the ego started to work its way in, and things were taking a darker turn. The first message that came up is it was talking about like body dysmorphia, and it came through and kind of like asked me the question, is lifting weights beneficial for you, or is this just some addiction you've developed because of your poor self-image that you had as an overweight kid? And you will never be happy unless you maintain this body fat percentage of less than 12%. And it just kind of kept getting that like darker and darker turn from there. And then kind of out of nowhere, there came the presence of the female figure, and the message that came in was, oh no, that's not it at all. The reason that you spend time in the gym, the reason that you're building muscle is so that you can give the best hugs. And I just busted out laughing. And it was hilarious to me, because when I look at other trip reports and people who talked about their experience with ayahuasca and listening to the share circles the next morning, it's not uncommon for people to go through ayahuasca and have these groundbreaking, life-changing experiences that set them on a whole new path. Yet the big message that I took out of this was, you lift weights so you can give the best hugs. So I thought that was pretty amusing. That kind of thought process wandered away. And the next one that came in, I guess another lesson that I encountered on that first night, was just to let others live their lives and to refrain from offering unsolicited advice. Now, I've spent many years studying health, nutrition, longevity, physical fitness, psychology, etc. And it was not uncommon for me to hijack a conversation and tell somebody why their diet was incorrect or how they could improve their workout routine. And I certainly have found myself far too often steering the conversation to psychedelics with people who truly had no interest in them and will likely never consider experimenting with them in their lifetime, even though I thought it could be very beneficial for them. So the message was basically, mind your own business. If someone asks you for any advice in any of these areas, feel free to share your knowledge, but we're all on our own path, and many people will have to go through a few more incarnations on this planet before they are open to self-improvement. So above all, the message was, just don't be so judgmental of others. As I was working my way through that thought process, that's whenever some of the nausea started to stir up. And it just got more and more and more unbearable until I finally hit the bucket and hit that purge. And I really do think that that was kind of what I cleared out of me on this experience, was that being judgmental toward others because of their own life choices. So when I finished the purge, I laid back on the mat, and then the facilitators started playing the song Hallelujah. I kind of sat there laughing to myself, because at that moment, it was the most beautiful song I had ever heard. I mentioned back in the podcast with Mark that we had a guest facilitator that weekend that was a no-shit Broadway star. And he truly took that song and every other song that he had participated in that weekend to just the next level. So, I mean, Hallelujah was always one of my favorite songs with each of the weekends sitting there with ayahuasca. But I just laughed because I'd come such a long way. I mean, as a child, I loathed church. I mean, waking up early on my weekends off of school, the weird cultiness of like the sit, stand, kneel, chanting weird prayers together, and then all of the music that was there was just associated with part of that whole experience. So I kind of just checked out for many, many years of anything that was religious music. And, if I would hear Christian this, Christian that, I was just like, ugh, how can people listen to this stuff? But now in this moment, I really understood the message that was in church music, and I understood what God really was. And I get singing together and giving thanks to this creator for giving us the opportunity to interact with one another on this amazing planet that's flying through the solar system. So it was just pretty amusing to come full circle from this kid that couldn't stand church to really understanding why religion exists in the first place and finding a lot of comfort in this traditionally religious song. So as soon as that song came to an end, the facilitator came out and said, okay, we're closing the ceremony, start sipping water, and it's time to land the ship. As usual, the ceremony had ended, but I was still under the effects of the DMT. So I headed out to my tent, threw some headphones on, and then my own personal journey continued in the way that it usually does. So I was just laying there and I cycled through all of the people in my life that mean so much to me. But the focus was really on my girlfriend in this one. And it was just crystal clear to me that she is absolutely my soulmate. And it just, really kind of resonated in me that I look forward to spending as much time as possible with her until we both depart these meat vehicles and find each other in the next life. Also, prior to this ceremony, there was a participant who had some kind of deck of cards. I don't know if it was tarot or what specifically the cards were, but she had offered cards to anybody that wanted to pick one before the ceremony. And I figured, why not? So I pulled one, and the card said amethyst, and it said that it stood for transformation, certainty, and confidence. And I do feel like these are pretty fitting descriptions for what I unpacked on that night one. So after the share circle in the morning, we decided to pass the day with a hike in Joshua Tree. I had pulled up the map of the national park a few days prior and just kind of looked around and tried to find the strangest rock formation that I could that was the furthest off of the main road, so we could kind of have some seclusion and find something that isn't just the stuff that Joshua Tree is known for in Instagram photos and all of that. So I dropped the pin and we headed out in that direction. As with all of the sites in Joshua Tree, this hidden gem did not disappoint. So we pulled up, got out of the car, and I saw the highest peak of the rocks in the distance, and I just set that as my destination. So Tyler and I started just trucking in, making our way to the summit, and I kind of just dropped into that flow state and kept pushing forward, just one foot after another, until at some point I noticed that we had lost Anthony and Mark. So we stopped for a moment and waited for them to catch up. And then whenever they got there, we went on our way. And it didn't really occur to me at that time that we weren't giving them the chance to rest as we rested while we were waiting for them to catch up. And we just kept pressing on. I eventually realized that Mark and Anthony did not seem to be having a good time. I mean, all of us had went through some pretty gnarly stuff the night before, and we were most likely on some level of dehydration. We finally reached the summit. I mean, amazing views all around, but those guys seemed very over the situation, especially Mark. He elaborated in our podcast together about his knee bothering him and that bee that just wouldn't leave him alone. But there was a lot of cursing and negative talk on the way back. And honestly, I truly began to worry about him. It kind of scared me to think that I had introduced him to this other side that we have access to, which often provides people a sense of relief, particularly like the terminal cancer patients that are in the clinical trials, because it seems as if when we transition to death, we leave behind the suffering that we sometimes encounter in this life. And with all of his negative talk about not having a reason to be here and continue to do this, it kind of terrified me that on some level he might be contemplating suicide. So I said a little prayer to the Mother Ayahuasca and asked that she dedicate some of her precious time this evening to support him and help bring him back around to being a happy and healthy soul. So we got back to the car, headed back to the Airbnb, and we prepped for night 2. In my journal, I wrote that I would love to have some more interaction with Mother Ayahuasca this evening because it felt rather limited on night 1, but that I would happily sacrifice my entire experience if it meant that Mark and Anthony could get the healing that they came there for. I also said that I'm happy to purge some of their trauma if it works that way and they could transfer it to me. The girl with the tarot cards was offering them again. This time I picked Eternal Love, which stood for happiness, harmony, and fulfillment, none of which were fitting for what was to come. So we pre-dosed again on night 2, and then the ceremony started at 6 p.m. I didn't journal much about that night, but all I remembered was that it sucked. I mean, there were barely any visuals. The loud puker, instead of there being an amusing aspect to it, it just became very annoying. It was like, oh, everybody pay attention to me. I'm puking. I can't keep it quiet. I don't know. It was just the way that it hit night 2. It became so like just grinding my gears. And then the music didn't hit the same, didn't sound as good as it did the night before. I couldn't get comfortable. And honestly, it was just a huge bummer. So when the second cup was offered, I jumped up to get that, hoping that it would change things. And it was just a whole lot more of the same situation. And there were no takeaways. I just laid there waiting for that ceremony to end. As soon as the facilitator called an end to the ceremony, I picked all my stuff up and beelined to the tent. I mean, I could see the eyes of people looking at me like, why did he leave so quickly? But I couldn't spend another moment in that room. I didn't like the vibe was not doing what I wanted it to. And I just had to get out of there. So I got back to my tent, threw the headphones on, and then that mood started to lighten a little bit. But between the songs, I thought I'd heard something. So I took the headphones off and I could hear somebody outside of my tent just bawling their eyes out because my tent was set up right next to the pool and there was a bunch of lounge chairs around the pool. So I can only assume that they hopped in one of those chairs and, were processing whatever they were processing. And that kind of bummed me out and killed the vibe. So I was just like, I just need to fall asleep. So I listened to a little bit more music and then I took the headphones off trying to sleep and I could still hear talking and crying. And it was just too much of a distraction to fall asleep. So I put the headphones on again and I just listened to music for another hour or so and then checked, finally had silence, and I crashed. At the share circle the next morning, I found that Mark, Anthony, and Tyler all had better experiences on night 2. So to be fair, I did say I was willing to sacrifice my journey to make sure that they had good ones, and maybe that's what happened. I mean, who knows? Maybe some of that aggravation, discomfort, and purging that I was dealing with was the transference from one of the other guys. I mean, either way, between both nights, I feel like we all got what we came for. I ended the journal entry saying, I love what they do here, but I think I'll probably take a break from Aya for a while. And that I did. I mean, it was, as I flipped ahead to my most recent experiences, it was roughly 2 years after that experience that I found that I had the calling to go back again. So yeah, this is a quick one, but like I said, I was very amused by the Giving Hugs download that came through. And I guess another thing that I just wanted to touch on with this one was the most profound experiences that I had were probably that first experience, because I think it's all about getting out of your comfort zone. And on that first weekend, I went up by myself. I knew nobody. I didn't know what to expect. And I think that that's what really allowed me to kind of like surrender and let go. Whereas when I went up with all of my friends, I was worried about all of them and making sure that they were having a good time and that they were getting what they needed. And there was a level of me and my brain power being focused on hoping they were okay than focusing on myself. So that's all I can say is that although there can be a benefit to you setting up one of these experiences with a close group of friends and going out to experience ayahuasca or some other sort of plant medicine, if you're really trying to do the work, I think, at least in my own opinion, that it's best to go solo if you really want to take the deep dive that's necessary for lasting change. So yeah, the quick one, I think that's all I had on this. We're actually pretty much getting up to modern times here I only have a couple more solo casts to go before I run out of material. But that being said, I still have a handful of guests that I'm hoping to get on, and hopefully I'll be able to organize with them soon. So until next time, take care. Happy holidays. Love you guys.